Well, everybody, thank you for coming to my first official presentation at IBIS. Forgive me for being a little nervous because I haven't spoken in front of you in such a capacity before. But I hope this is going to be educational for many of you. It's something that I've learned over the last 10 years from many talks like this here and elsewhere. And the way the presentation is going to go today is I'm going to try to take you through a real life scenario of what I would do depending on what I would have with me from just my phone, and then my little travel camera, which I'll show, then my little travel camera with a little flash, and then my more professional camera with a speed light, and then at the very end, hopefully time permitting, we will do an actual portrait with one light. There was going to be a follow-up to this, which we'll cover later, on April 20th. There's a sign-up sheet where I'm going to do a much more advanced workshop in which we will cover 1, 2, and 3 light setups and maybe more, and maybe even outdoor with mixing natural light with strobes. So if you're interested and you like how this goes, join me on April 20th. So first, a quick tip on studio setups. So how many of you guys use a backdrop in your home studio or any studio, or just ever use a backdrop? Anybody? Anybody use backdrops? Okay. If you do not, it's very easy to set up. Now, some of you might not want to set one up, but if you do, I'll show you how easy it is. Okay? So for me, I purchased this $20 backdrop. It's by Kate. I'm not sponsored by Kate in any way. The cool thing about this particular backdrop, and there's a reason why I didn't put that up in advance, is it has a little pocket over here, which makes things really easy to put on a stand. So you don't have to mount it, you have to clip it or anything. Also, when you have multiple of them rolled up, there's a picture of the actual backdrop on the pocket. So when it's rolled up, you have a little picture for reference. Speaking of rolling them up, I don't know if you guys noticed, I have a roll over there. That's how I store my backdrops. It makes them much more, not wrinkled, straight. You can steam them, both the fabric ones and the non-fabric ones. But once I discovered these, I'm not going back to any other ones. Now, when you set up a backdrop, the first thing you want to make sure is that there's sandbags for stability. Otherwise, they're going to tip right over, especially if somebody trips over them. But most of these backdrops come, this is very cheap. I don't know, like under $100 for sure, maybe under $50. But when they come, these things are different lengths, and 4 of them connect to each other. But in here, there's a hole. So the expectation is that you're going to get that hole perfectly onto this screw on both sides by yourself when there's a client waiting for you to set up a shoot. So if you don't feel like doing that, you spend $20 more and you get a super clamp up here, which makes it really easy to put these things in and out. So I can actually take one out, and this one is tightened up. Wait, I tighten it up. In like seconds, I can put the backdrop on through the pocket. Maybe Arthur will hold the side for me. But this can be done by yourself very quickly because of the pocket. So this goes right in. And that's it. And then it takes another second to place it. You do not have to get this perfect into the clamps. If you want to be a little bit safer, you do want to tighten the clamps up just a tiny bit. And now we have, I don't know if anybody was counting, let's say a minute or less, set up a photo backdrop for my wonderful subject. Speaking of a subject, does anybody want to volunteer to actually be in the photos instead of looking at a half-dressed doll? Anybody? Anybody? Because we're gonna keep going with her. Nobody? Okay. We'll keep going. If you change your mind, just let me know. So I cover all those things. Oh, so I talked about roll-up, backdrop. Yes. Okay. So let's talk quickly about my definition of what photography is. Most people will know about photography with different definitions, but it all comes down to the process of capturing the light to record an image. But for me, it's much more complicated than that, because I think it's an art of compromise. in using what you have with you and around you to capture the best possible image in a given situation. All right, so with a camera, sometimes you have a great camera with you, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a light with you, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's overcast, sometimes you're in the middle of a really bright scene, sometimes it's dark. So what do you do? Well, first let's talk about this. I'm going to ask you guys a question. What is the absolute worst photo you can take?
Overexposed.
By how much?
A lot.
Completely blown out. So a white, or the exact opposite?
Dark.
Dark. So this is the absolute worst photo anybody can take, right? No argument there. So let me ask you this. What's better, this or a photo that has bad lighting, poor composition, wrong focal length, but captures an everlasting memory? Right? So to put two examples side by side, right? My doll is on the backdrop, yes. You have the worst picture you can ever take, and then you can have a really bad picture. Now that is very wide angle. It's very bad lighting. The facial features are, exaggerated. But if that was like your granddaughter touching a dolphin magically at Disney, would that be a good picture? Even if the lighting was bad, even if there was harsh shadows, even if, like, everything else aside, the composition, the backdrop doesn't matter, right? So capture the moment is the most important thing. So you want to capture the image. Now, if you have control over the image, over the time of the situation, you have a little bit more time to prepare, can we do better? Come on. Of course. Of course we can do better, right? So how do we do better with a phone? The first thing you want to know the camera on your phone. You want to make sure, one thing I forgot to do is do this and this. You want to make sure that on your phone is all your settings. So there are a lot of modes on your phone. There's a professional mode. There's many phones have multiple lenses on them. There's usually an ultra wide now. There's usually a zoom lens. Sometimes 1x, sometimes 5x, sometimes 10x. So you definitely want to know your phone. You want to use a remote trigger. So on my phone, when I want to take a great picture, I will do just about everything I would do with my normal camera. I would stabilize it. What does stabilizing it mean? Put it on a tripod if you can. What if you don't have a tripod? You take a bottle of water and you prop the phone on a bottle of water. Now it's still stable. This way the picture is going to be 100 times better than if I'm doing this in low light, even if I'm trying to hold it steady. So don't try. Grab something, prop your camera on it. If you have a stylus in your phone, if you happen to have a Samsung, one of the more recent ones, it has a button to trigger the camera. I can just press this button, it'll take a picture. Now an iPhone doesn't have that, so what else do you do? On your smartwatch, there's apps available where you tap the screen, it'll take the picture on your phone, both Android and iPhone. You can use a delay function on any smartphone. So it doesn't matter the brand or how fancy it is. There are delay settings where you can say 2, 5, 10 seconds. So you prop it, you press the button, and then in 2 seconds it takes a very nice stable picture. It will improve your pictures, especially in low light, significantly. And of course, if you have a tripod, there's special phone tripods, or you can mount an attachment, which I actually will demonstrate momentarily, where you can have a fancy tripod and it can still support your phone on a tripod. This costs like $5 on Amazon. Okay.
Roman, you could also use a Bluetooth remote.
Correct. You can also use a Bluetooth remote, which is, yeah. So any remote trigger, stabilized phone, or a delay trigger will get you better photos. And if you can't use any of those, do try to stabilize your hand. So I'm sure you guys in the photography lab, you know how to properly usually hold a camera. You want your elbow propped into your chest, into your rib for as much stability. You want your lens resting on the hand, right? And then you're using your second hand mainly to control the angle. But this is where all the stability is. So I get as much movement out of my arm and as much stability into it as I can. When I do it with my phone, same principles apply. Bam. right? So get as much stability as you can, get the shakiness out. It'll help. It'll definitely help. And also look for what many people call the God's softbox. So when it's daytime, wait for a cloud to come by, or do it on a cloudy day, or go in the shade if you can, or look for a window light. And when in doubt, add your own lighting. So next is an actual demonstration. So give me 1 second, because I have to actually, I'm literally going to do it live. So nobody still wants to be volunteered to be a model? Start. Now we switch this to 3. No, it's 2, 3. Okay. You can see my phone. Okay. Might have to be a little bit closer to this thing. So if I start with my phone in its 1x mode, or God forbid, ultra wide of a 0.6 mode. When I get close to my subject, and it's intentionally very poorly lit, which was a little bit better, but it is what it is. It would look like this, right? Horrible. Just absolutely horrible, and I have to get that close to try to get that shot. And as we already discussed, if that was the only option, it would be okay, right? If that was literally like your settings, you capture the moment, it's good enough. If I take this picture, it's a little bit better, but it's still not good. But if I go to my 3 mode, still get a little bit closer. Now it's starting to look kind of like a decent looking portrait, right? Not perfect, not perfect. But is this better than what we just had 2 seconds ago? Significantly better, right? Can we make it even better? Does anybody have an extra phone I can borrow for a second? And turn your flashlight on. Arthur got one? Who gets the flashlight on first? There you go. My man. So when in doubt, if you're taking a picture of, if there's more than one person with you, you do this, and now how much better does this picture look than without it? So you're at the Ibis restaurant, and you're trying to take a picture of somebody who's visiting you. And you're like, the lighting there is absolutely horrendous for photos, right? What do? You grab an extra phone, you put it at 45 degrees to the person, or it could be multiple people, and you get this much of an improvement, which I think is tremendous, right? Huge improvement, like before, after. And this is not doing much. So this is my first tip to you guys. Can you do more? You can do more than one phone. Some of the flashlights also have settings where you can like increase and decrease the brightness. Thank you, Arthur. Now, when I go to things like theme parks, I don't carry an extra phone with me, but I do carry this little LED light. It's tiny, it's pocketable, and all I do is literally this. Sorry, too many wires. It does exactly the same thing as that phone did, except it's a little bit nicer of a light, a little bit softer, and it's always in my pocket. I can throw it in my little bag, and I throw it in my back pocket, and it's there with me. It can do magic. 20 bucks on Amazon. I'm not trying to sell any of this stuff, I promise.
Roman, how far away, how close have you experienced with that?
As needed. So good question, very good question. How far? So it does have a brightness adjustment. So this is it on its max setting. So even from here, is this thing still live? Or did it turn off on me? It's still live. Yeah. So that's without. This is from all the way back here. It's almost too bright. Like I can actually take it down probably to 80%, and it's making a huge difference.
Roman, can you change the Kelvin on that too?
Can I change the...
Kelvin on the hand light?
Can I change the Kelvin on the can light? Not on this one, but there are definitely some that you can. Good question. So speaking of like that particular big light that's lighting me is actually set at 3500 today because the room lighting is a little bit more yellow. Ideally, when you're shooting during the day, you want a daylight light. So even at night, you usually would want a daylight calibrated light in most situations, but sometimes it is very useful to have a yellow light. So if you're doing things with the yellow lights around you, those Christmas lights, whatnot, it's really helpful to have like a 4500 or 3500 LED light with you. Many of them can change this. Might be a little bit more than $20. Okay, so back to my, oops, one of these.
What would that be called? A pocket light or something?
It's just an LED light that's really meant for video. It's like this one is rechargeable, so I can use USB-C to charge it. Some of them have, you can put a battery in it. It's also like really, really lightweight. And if somebody wants a specific model, happy to share. It was really, really cheap. It might have been $15. But there are some much better ones. So it all depends on how much you want to spend. Some of them have effects that they can do and all sorts of cool stuff. So at that point, it's like how much you want to invest into a light. Okay, let's move this out of the way. So I did prepare an example. So this is what it would have been at 1x zoom, a 3x zoom, and a 3x zoom with an LED which can come from another phone. So this is an extreme situation. Can we do better than that? Of course, right? So the world doesn't stop with a cell phone, right? Sometimes it's the only camera you got, but what if you have a better one or you planned ahead? So what do when I travel? I bring with me a point-and-shoot camera. Now this is not the good old-fashioned point-and-shoot camera. It's a slightly more modern one. There's a lot of benefits to having an actual camera, even in the days of having really good phones doing all your work for you. So why would I have a camera, an actual camera? The first answer is manual settings. If you're in a photography club and you own a camera, you probably know how to use your camera on manual. If you don't, let's have another lecture on that. I'm pretty sure Arthur covered some of it. But basically, there are certainly times when you want to control your aperture, when you want to control your shutter speed, and when you want to control other settings in the camera. So this gives me a whole lot more freedom, and I can go to countries where I would not bring my $2,000 Nikon with a $3,000 lens. So this is basically always with me. Doesn't matter where I am. It literally sits in my car, because if somebody steals it, it's an 8-year-old $300 camera. I'm not really worried. Now, yes, the camera by itself is wonderful. But there's one must-have that some cameras don't have in this format, and that is a hot shoe. And no, it's not the shoe on fire. So if you don't know what a hot shoe is, it's a shoe on a camera that's designed to hold a flash, more commonly a speed light, which I can demonstrate in a moment. But, did I cover? So a hot shoe is a must. This particular camera has 1.8 lens, which really helps in low light conditions. And it also helps with taking a nice portrait with that slightly washed out background. Now it's not the same thing as a 1.8 on a full frame sensor because it's a much smaller sensor, but it's still good to have in your pocket. While I'm on here, so what you don't want, the reason you want a hot shoe is so you can have a flash that's not a pop-up flash. Now some cameras have those little tiny pop-up flashes. Those are a disaster. If you remember the days of red eyes, it's a result of that lights shining directly into the person's eyes and reflecting right back into the camera lens. So that is to be avoided. There are some things you can do to mitigate it. Some of them do allow you to tilt it, so if you can, tilt it up. If you can't tilt it up, you want to make sure that it's on its lowest setting. So in other words, expose for the room, for the current lighting condition, no matter how bad they are. And then it works as a fill flash. So those of you who may not or may not know the difference in the key light and the fill light, the key light is the primary light that's casting most of the light on your subject. The fill light is filling in the shadows. So if you have a little pop-up flash, you only want to use it to fill the shadows unless you're in an extreme situation where there is no other light at all. So usually use your available light, use your little pop-up as a fill. And I already said expose with the environment. But if that's not an option, or you want a better option, there's yet another toy that I brought with me. This was the best $100 I spent in the last couple of years. This is made by Godox, and it's called the Lux Senior. Lux Senior. Did I not put it up on the thing? Oh, it's kind of small, but it's on there. Now, anybody want to guess what this is?
Flash.
It's a flash. It's also very light, and it's very small. It's not much bigger than this. Now, it doesn't actually look like a flash until you do this. And now, you have what looks like a retro-looking flash. Now, this is, I want to say, 100 times more powerful than my little LED light. I might be a little bit off on the number, so don't quote me on that. But a whole lot more powerful, and I have 64 levels of control. It's all manual. So this little thing has no smart things in it. It's all manual. So you turn it on, and then you guess your exposure, and if you need to change it, you go like 1/64. Now let me go to 1/32, and that's it. So it's just one click away. It does, for like another $8, you can get a little soft box for it, which I also have, but it's in one of my bags, and I'm not going to bother looking. Also makes you look really cool, because this thing goes right on top of this thing. And now I look like I'm a professional photographer with the fancy gear in my hand, and it also looks a little retro. So way cooler. So I want to ask the question, does anybody actually want to be a model one more time? Because I can do this for real, and I can plug my camera in with the light. So one more volunteer? Yes, no, maybe? No. You want to do it? There we go. Beautiful. We have a live picture, right? So in this lighting, you guys can already see, like if I just take a picture without my flash, it's going to be really bad.
Do you need to have to turn worse in the background?
Yeah, if I can move you a little bit more over here. Yeah. Well, that's good. We can make this work. So like if I was trying to take a decent portrait of him, right? Like that's kind of, yeah, we crop, but that would be it, right? So that would be the picture, assuming we had some light. But we don't have light. So how do we add light? We literally add light, right? So I'm going to slightly guess at the settings because I don't actually know how much light I need to add. But there it is. So I'm sorry, that's sideways. So that's on 30, so I can even go less. I'm pressing it instead of turning it. There we go. So I want to take the ISO down. Now, if I take the same picture one more time. There we go, right? So even in a room with really bad lighting, you can take the same picture and it ends up way better, right? And $100. So like as far as I'm concerned, this is a no-brainer. I travel with this thing all the time. Again, it just sits in my car because you never know when you're going to catch a moment. And when you have that moment and you don't have your professional gear, if you can take this and you can have it with you at all times, it becomes magic, right? Okay. So questions on this?
Did you adjust on the flash, the settings?
I actually put it on, believe it or not, the lowest setting it has. So the first picture I took was a little bit overexposed. So I took the lowest setting and I took the ISO down to 400 and I didn't have time to mess with any of the other settings.
You did it on the flash or the camera?
So the ISO was set to 1600, which was too high on the camera, so I took it down to 400. That was on the camera. And on the flash, this little dial in the back literally turns. And it's got manual markings on it. So like the first picture you have to guess because it's all manual. So unless you have I have a light meter, but I'm not going to show it to you there. So a light meter is a great tool. If you have the time to do it, anytime I do professional portraits or headshots, I use a light meter and I balance multiple lights. So I know exactly how much light is coming from each of my light sources. But when you're doing a travel photo, this is kind of all you need. And you take one picture, you take a look at the result, and then the second picture is usually perfect, right? So speaking of travel photos,
Roman,
yeah.
how far can you get away from the subject and still have enough light, and also how wide can you get?
With this?
Yeah.
Good question. So it's less dependent on this, because like I said, that was the lowest setting at ISO 400, right? So if I put it on the highest setting, it would be like 8 times brighter, which means I can go 4 times further. There's a, don't quote me on the formula, there's a number, it's like an inverse rule of something or rather, like you double the light and you have the distance, something like that. Anybody? Is Michael in the room? It's very close to that, something like that. You can look it up. It's something like inverse law, inverse square law. You're right, but it's proportional. So I think if you go twice, half the distance gets you more than double. It's like 4 times. Thank you. Yes, what he said. So, I should have been prepared for that question. But long story short, for the size of the flash, it can cover a good distance. You might have to crank your ISO up a little bit. But so for a travel photo, I was going to cover a little bit. So I'll answer part of that question with this. So when you take a travel photo, even outside, you think it's bright outside. But there's a big problem with it being too bright outside. It casts harsh shadows. Or sometimes you end up in the shade, but behind you is a bright lit scene, right? So first of all, you want to use all the composition rules, which we have some phenomenal photographers who we talked about before, and I'm not going to cover at all. But once you have a perfectly composed photo, let's pretend this is a perfectly composed photo. You literally step into the scene while having your camera either on a tripod or somebody who's traveling with you, or you have them step into the scene. And you end up in the same photo as the one that you framed before it. But I'll give you one more example. In this case, the foreground is dark. It's in the shade. The background is midday. It's very bright. So if I take this picture and I step into it, I'm going to be a silhouette, or almost a silhouette. There'll be very little light on me. But if I turn this thing on, and don't ask me to what brightness, but one of the settings, it got me almost overexposed in this picture, slightly on the high side. If I had to redo it, I would take it down probably half the power of whatever it was at, but it's good enough. Much better than if there was no light on me. Is it a great portrait? No, it wasn't supposed to be. Right? I was trying to capture a beautiful scene while I was on my drive to New Jersey through the Blue Ridge Mountains. But this is certainly better than if I had no light. It's better than natural light, and it allows me to beautifully capture the background in its current lighting situation while also being in the photo. Okay, so moving on. I need to grab one more thing from my bag. This one. It's made by Godox.
How do you spell it?
Godox. And the name is LUX Senior, SENIOR, like unfortunately most folks in this room. There is a junior version of this. I do not recommend it, but it's even smaller and it's much more compact, and it'll still help you, but it starts to look much more like the pop-up flash. So when this thing was on the camera, it might not be a lot higher than the camera, but it's still significantly higher than the lens, which pretty much avoids that red light effect. So the further you get off the lens, the better. Speaking of, I brought one more toy that I'm not going to demonstrate, but I'll mention. So it is possible to actually do off-camera flash even with a little camera. So no matter what model camera you have, come on, you can have, as long as it has a little hot shoe, you can have a little transmitter that will go into the hot shoe of a camera. And you can have a little receiver that also itself has a hot shoe. And you can put any flash, including that little Lux Senior, into here, get it off camera, get this mounted on something else, and this will trigger it. And I can get nice off-camera lighting with even that flash. But this is outdated, so I don't use it anymore. Literally, it's been sitting in my closet without batteries. I have no use for it anymore because I have better things than that. A more modern Speedlight has the receiver built into the Speedlight. Now, how many of you guys use a Speedlight? Only a few? How many of you don't use a Speedlight? Wow. Those who don't use a Speedlight, do you have a camera, a DSLR or a mirrorless camera? Okay, if you have a DSLR mirrorless camera, don't even think twice. Spend I think it's $140 on a Speedlight. It'll change your photography life. I used to carry this with me everywhere, but it's good 4 times heavier than this. So I do not carry it with me anymore. I carry it only when I need to because it really is heavier. Also, it is not ideal because you look kind of ridiculous putting that on here. It will work, sort of, except this is a Nikon branded Speedlight. This is a Canon camera. Do you think it'll work? Who thinks it'll work? Who thinks it won't work? It will work, but in a limited scope. So what will work is, so in every Speedlight and every hot shoe, there's several contacts on the bottom. They're used for the camera to communicate with the flash. Now, on the bottom of this one, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's one. Anybody know what this one does? It triggers it. Do you want to know what the other 3 or 4 do? Communicates with the system. So if it's a Nikon brand camera and I want to utilize some Nikon specific functions like TTL, for example, through the lens, where the camera can tell the flash how much power it needs in any given situation without you doing anything manually. Wonderful setting when you're doing event photography or when you're in a rush, not to be relied on. If you put this camera, this Speedlight on this camera, it cannot communicate because this one has the 3 pins in other places, or 4 pins. But the center pin is still there. So the one most crucial function that you would ever need from a Speedlight is still there. You can still trigger it. What you can't do is use any of the fancy features that it comes with, specifically TTL. Through the lens, I just mentioned that. It's very, very useful. Whenever I do event photography, I almost always do TTL. HSS is high-speed sync. With a Speedlight, I almost never use high-speed sync. There are very limited situations when it's useful. That would be a lecture on itself, but generally speaking, the one time you can try it is when you're in very, very bright conditions outside, and you're trying to make sure your subject's background is washed out, so you're using a very fast lens like a 1.8 to 2.8. And the problem with using a flash until this year has been the sync speed. So there's only, even though when the flash goes off, it's really fast. And the actual speed at the light burst depends on the intensity for which you selected in the flash. So when you think you're changing the power, like I was actually talking before, like you can change the power, it's not true. The power is the same. The duration for which it's on is what's actually changing. So, but they're so fast, as far as the camera is concerned, you're changing the actual brightness of the light because more light gets the sensor. Now most cameras, even the best professional ones, have either a 1/200 or 1/250 of a second sync speed. Sufficient for most situations, unless you're in bright sunlight. And you got to get up to like 1/800, 1/2000. Now you can't sync with your flash speed. Now I'm going to promote a different brand. This year, for the first time in a consumer available camera, Sony has come out with what's called a global sensor. A global sensor can capture the flash at any speed. So if you set your sensor to 1/16,000, it can actually outpace the speed of the flash. So they gave you a new control now where you can like adjust to get it just perfect. So you have to sync it with when the flash fires. But the point is that limitation is going to go away. It's going to go away in our lifetime. The first camera is already available. It's expensive. It's like $6,000. I do not have one. If somebody wants to buy me one, I'll gladly accept it. For the moment, I'll stick to Nikons. I think the next Nikon is rumored also to have a global shutter. Don't quote me on that, but it's a rumor. So, how am I doing on time? I got plenty of time. Moral of the story, 99.9% of the cameras have a limitation of how fast the shutter speed has to be in the camera in order to use an off-camera flash. The only way to overcome that is to actually use what's called a steady light, like a video light, like one of the ones I'm using right now for video. Those can get very bright too. So in the situations when you do need to have faster shutter speed, except when you're outside, that might not be powerful enough. But if you have several of them, it might be, and they do have them even more powerful. That's actually running at 15% right now. So that goes another 85% higher. And there are lights that are much more powerful than that. Hard to overpower the sun. So why was I saying all that? So high-speed sync allows your camera to shoot at a higher shutter speed, anything that your camera can support, and still sync with the camera. But there's a tax you have to pay. The tax is the intensity of the light. So what actually happens is this thing has to fire several times continuously. So it doesn't just fire once. It fires a bunch of flashes within that span of time to make sure one of them catches the camera's shutter. And it works like magic, except you're only getting about a quarter of a max power of your flash. So if whatever its max power is at 100%, you're going to get 25%. So if you're still trying to overpower the sun, you can, but you're going to have to get probably, I'm guessing, about this close to your subject, which could be useful in some situations, depending. It might not be a person, it might be a flower, it might be something else that you're trying to do. So depending on the size of the flash that you have with you and your conditions, it might be possible. But I don't recommend high-speed sync. So anybody want to guess another big benefit, you don't have to guess, it's on the screen, of a strobe, that this one, what can the Speedlight do that that little flash cannot? Arthur?
Except modifiers?
Yes. So I can put this, I did not mount it, on a light stand. I can put an umbrella in front of it. I can put it, actually I did bring that, I have an example. I did bring this light where I can literally mount this thing inside of here. Very convenient. I also, more importantly, you can get off the camera. So yes, you can get into a modifier, you can get off the camera. But even if you cannot do either of those things, you can still do it on the camera, and you can bounce the light. So I don't know if you guys actually remember what that last picture we took looked like. But we're going to attempt to use a Nikon Speedlight on a Canon camera without me changing a single setting on the camera. So I'm going to guess at the brightness, because this is even more powerful than that one was. So let's start with 1/64th and pray. But I can actually turn this thing. Oh, no, I'm no longer sharing live. I apologize. I should have kept the cable plugged in. But if I take the same picture I did before, it's actually not bright enough. So, so I bounced it off the ceiling. What I was really trying to explain, and it might be really hard for me to show without plugging the camera back in, which I can, is that I'm going to bounce this light off the ceiling to create much softer light. It might be too small, but Penny will vouch for me.
Oh, it's great.
Right?
For real, for real.
I can really, it will take me like 1 second to plug it back into the TV. Let me just turn this thing off. I did keep the cable somewhere back here, right? Too many pieces to this puzzle. Okay. And now play. 3. Okay. So the lighting, it might be slightly underexposed in this particular shot, but it's much softer, right? So compared to the previous one, this one, right? This was much more direct. So if you look where the actual, in the middle of his eye, you can see the flash was really shining in the middle of his eye. It did not create a red eye. So just that little flash was sufficiently above the lens to avoid red eye. It actually he looks well exposed, and I apologize for this one being a little bit underexposed. But the lighting is much softer. I also was a little bit further, not zoomed in as much. But when you're going for a softer portrait, especially when you're doing events and you don't want to shine a harsh light into people's eyes, you can still keep the Speedlight right on your camera, point it at the ceiling, point it at an angle, make it reflective of something, and it'll get you a much, much better picture.
That's a good question. If there's a very high ceiling, is that going to work?
Depending on how high. I mean, I want to say yes, as long as you're indoors. These things are pretty strong. You put it up at 100%, it'll spread a lot of light. But again, so if you plan ahead, depending on what you're doing, if you're doing events and whatnot, you can put one of those big things without the modifier on it, pointing at a ceiling or somewhere really up high, and you'll just literally disperse the light everywhere at the events. So if I had to do like a wedding reception or something like that, I would put one of those. I actually have a different modifier called a lantern. Looks like a Chinese lantern because it evenly spreads the light everywhere. And with that, I would put it very high up in the corner. And every time it goes off, it literally just lights up the whole room. And that's my fill light. I would still have my speed light on me. But in that case, I might even use it as a key light. So I might use that as a primary light and just let the lantern fill in the shadows to make it a much better looking picture. I did mention this little toy, but I didn't not show it, so I figured I might as well show it. This is a light meter, Smoklin. These things are expensive. Don't ask me how much I paid for it. It was a lot. But it does allow you to do much more a higher level, like more professional photos, because you can figure out the exact output of every strobe that you're using. So you can like trigger one, measure it, trigger another one, measure it, trigger the rim light, measure it, make sure nothing is overexposed, get nice balance, like one stop, one is slightly brighter than the other. It does magic. So I do love this little toy. It's also always in my camera bag, but I pretty much only use it in the studio.
We're in the studio. I understand for portability, the speed lights and all that.
Yep.
In the studio, would you just use the video lights because it's constant if you were taking portraits?
Great question. Would I only use video lights if I'm taking portraits? Yes. My answer is no. Now, there are situations when my answer would be yes. So in some situations, yes. For example, if I wanted to use this big TV as an improvised backdrop, I can literally put anything I want on the TV, make it a nice scene, stand in front of it, and try to take a picture. If I use the flash, the TV is going to look black. But if I use that light the way it is right now, there's a reason why we set that thing at 15%. Is that so if I walk in front of the screen is not blown out, but it's also not black. So that light is actually balanced with the current output of the TV. There's another benefit. It's what you see is what you get. It's like, so, can I skip all the way to my last slide? I'll skip, yeah, this one. It's not the last slide. So the easiest way to learn what a flash will do is by using constant lights. Because you can see the result. This one happens to be a harsh light. It's not a soft light because it's far away from me and it's small. If I put that big thing next to me, it'll be very different light, but it would have to be much closer, right? So, but you can see what happens when you have one light, what happens where it's positioned, what happens when you have multiple lights. So the biggest downside to constant light, anybody want to guess?
Batteries.
Good guess, but not the biggest downside. The biggest downside to a constant light is intensity. So that giant light outputs about the same amount of light at its maximum as my speed light. But the speed light only does it for a split second, but that does it consistently. So with my strobes, I can generate a lot more light, meaning my ISO can go down to 100 or 200, whatever I want, really. But like in the studio, ideally, you want to be at your native ISO. If you don't know what it is, look it up. Different cameras are different. Like my little camera is actually 125. Not 100. Some are 100. Most are 100. Some are 64. I think some are less, not sure. So you do want to know what your native ISO is on your camera. It will produce the absolute best picture quality at its native ISO. So as you increase it, even a little bit, even if you go to 200 and 400, it's negligible, but it does add noise. So if you want the absolute best photo, you want the ISO at the native ISO of the camera, let's say 100. As soon as you increase it to 400, you can get your lights to a quarter of the power. Great. So if you're running on battery power, you can always up the ISO, lower the light, have the same exposure, but you pay a tax. You pay a tax in that grain, in the noise. Now, modern cameras, like a new mirrorless Nikon, I think if I shoot to 1200, 1250 ISO, it's 1600 is 1600 is barely visible. Anything under 1600, I would challenge anybody to tell me like what ISO I was, unless you blow it up huge. So even at our like 16 by 20 sizes, if I shoot 1600 portrait and I put it next to 100 ISO portrait, none of you will be able to pick it on the wall. They will look identical. But if I blow it up on maybe the screen this big and you walk up to it, you will actually see a difference. So keep it as low as you can. But like when I do on-location shooting, and I even have my big strobes, I try to never use the strobes at their 100% power or even half power. Quarter is pretty much the max I go to. My normal working setting is 1/16th, so 16th power. Anybody want to guess why? There's two reasons, at least. Arthur? It was the other answer. Battery power. So at 16th power, it'll last much longer. So my battery in that strobe is rated for, I think, 300 photos at 100%. But if I take it to 16th, I can take like 2,000 photos and still have battery left over. The second reason is recycle speed. So all strobes, once you fire it, it takes time for you to fire it again. So if you're at 100% intensity, or usually it's in fractions, like 1/1, once you fire the strobe, on a good strobe, it'll take about a second. On a cheap strobe, it can take as much as 2-3 seconds to fully recycle. Some really, really expensive ones will do it a little bit faster. Now, if I do 1/16th, I can do 8 shots in 1 second, which is about as fast as my camera goes, and it has enough time to recycle. So if it can only do 100% in 1 second, it can do like 8 of them easily in the same second. So I can just go click, 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 make sure I catch a nice smile, nice look for my subject if I'm doing a portrait, and plenty of light still, but it gives me that recycle time and it keeps my battery going. So those are the benefits. There's an in-between, whoever asked the question about constant lights. So should I drag this thing out? No, I'm skipping ahead. In my beautiful portable rig, actually, it might block some of you all, but if I put a light on him. Does this block anybody? Okay. I kind of want to end up with a good portrait of you. Actually, I'm not good at all. So now, if I do this. So most good strobes have what's called a modeling light. So can you guys already see that the lighting on him has changed significantly? Right? Like, here, I'll do before and after. That was before. Come on. This is after. Right? Much better. Oh, come on. I can actually go brighter than that. You have to hold the button. So these modeling lights are not very powerful. But even with a naked eye, you guys can see that now he's actually lit well. I'm sorry, you can't see it, but I can plug. I'll help you. I will answer this question. We're not out of time. In fact, we have plenty of time. So really quick note while I set up the actual camera on my rigged lighting cart. So when my ex-girlfriend left, nobody wanted to carry my lights for me anymore. So I built this thing, and then I tried taking it outside, and it fell right over and broke one of my flashes. So then I realized I needed some weight to hold it down when you're outside. And I put in my camera bag, which is fairly heavy, on it. So now I can mount my light onto the cart, and it's held down by the camera bag, so it's always in place. Now, when you're taking a portrait of somebody, ideally, you want to be eye level with your subject. That's true for humans, that's true for pets, it's pretty much true for everybody. I'm going to be a little bit higher just so I don't have to bend too far down, so forgive me. Also, can I still move you like a good foot and a half to your right? And so while I'm still setting all this up, I feel like I should go back a slide or two, because I didn't cover this. All right, so we talked about speedlights. Were there any questions about the speedlights? I think we covered a lot of it, right? So the biggest benefit is you can bounce. They're still pourable. They're still light, but they're heavier than my little light. Now you can still go better. So then we go to strobes. So what are the benefits of strobes? They're much more powerful than my speedlight. They work with much easier with a whole lot of modifiers. They're designed to be used with a modifier. But they're less portable. Now they're still fairly portable, but not nearly as portable as this thing is, right? So that thing, I get 2 of those in my travel bag, and this is one of the bigger sides. There's 2 sizes that are smaller than this, so there can be fairly portable battery-powered strobes. This one is 400 watts. This one is like 60. So you go from 60, there's a 100, there's a 200, there's a 300, and then there's a 400. So this one is almost 4 times more powerful. Actually, this is 4 times more powerful, and then some, than this speedlight. It also has TTL. You can work with my Nikon's trigger and do through the lens. It's completely useless to me. Not once have I tried using it because it's pointless. Because if you're using strobes, you might as well set up your exposure manually. Like otherwise, what's the point? Like maybe if you're outside, the cloud is changing, maybe. But even then, I would still use my meter and I would set it manually. But HSS, the high-speed sync on these, is much more useful than on the little one. Because in the right conditions, it can overpower the sun. I still try to avoid it because it kills the recycle time. Like you do it once and then you have to like wait seconds for that thing to recycle to give you another picture. So use it at your own risk, but it's better. It can be useful for high-speed sync. Or just buy the $6,000 Sony and you don't have to think about it again. Okay, so now again, for headshots, I would almost always use a vertical layout. So you portrait, that's why it's called a portrait. Really, it's like portrait, landscape, portrait. So like from the get-go, they always wanted to call a portrait a portrait. You don't want to do a portrait as a landscape. But for the sake of this presentation, we'll keep it landscape just so that you guys can see. It's out of focus. It's okay. We'll fix that. Okay. So this is without me touching a single setting on my camera. So let's see if we can address that. So you can actually see the settings. So I'm going to go down in shutter speed. I'm going to go down in aperture. The shutter speed normally, actually, I'll give you 2 examples. So this is, before I do anything with a flash, we were talking about the modeling light. So let's turn off the modeling light. So now we have really bad lighting conditions, right? It happens sometimes. So if you had absolutely no choice and you took this picture, and I'll let him look at the picture. Here, I'll put it on the screen. So there's a picture with really bad lighting, right? It is certainly not a portrait. I'm sorry? What? Fair enough. That's why I really should have gone lower. He's right. You're right. I'll do it again. I'll do it again. Look at me first. Okay. So here is that picture. Now, granted, this is a good camera with a good lens in really bad lighting conditions, and it looks decent. Right? But there are problems with it. So like if you actually want to critique, Arthur would like critique the hell out of this. Look at the harsh shadow that like he's casting on the shirt. The background is way brighter. His face doesn't have any light on it, right? There's a lot of problems with that picture. Why does it go off? Now, if I turn this modeling light on, come on, turn on. Well, I might need to get a little bit closer to him and a little bit lower to actually have an effect. Okay. So now some of those problems have been solved. So I'll actually take this picture. Okay, so now he has light on his face. It's still a little bit darker than the top light, unfortunately, because like that's being reflected off of that light, right? So there's still issues, but it's better. It's better. There's still shadow. Can't fix all of that, but now we can turn my flash on, right? So if I actually, is the modeling light still on? Oh, so the modeling light went back off.
Lower that even more, the strobe even more.
I could. I don't think we need to in this case. So the ideal position for single light normal portrait is 45 degrees to the side of the subject. Now, it would probably be better on the other side. There's also like some light. Oh, he's literally sitting under a bulb, which is casting. That light is kind of, sometimes you can't control. Like we could move him, we could do all this, right? We could adjust. But if you can't adjust, but you have your light, you can solve a lot of the problems. So now, the same light, now I'm going to have to guess on intensity. So forgive me on the first picture. Overexposed. Also had to guess on the, oh, what I didn't show you, I'm sorry. Let me back up for a second. Forgive the bad picture. But this one. So what I wanted to show you is the ISO setting of this one versus the one before. So this is the one with the room lighting. And the ISO was 4500. I had it set on auto ISO because I didn't know what the exposure would be needed. The one with the modeling light on, at 75% of a very weak modeling light bulb on a battery-powered strobe, took the ISO down to 900. Well within the acceptable portrait limit of this camera. So up to 1600, you guys would not be able to tell the difference, like I was saying before, right? So like, if I had to blow up this portrait, like if it happened to be a great portrait, I could use this picture. It's a totally usable picture. So forgive me, I'm going to zoom into your eye. You can see the reflection, it's all there, right? So a little bit slightly out of focus. So now the next picture is overexposed, but just to take a look, so it's shot, it itself decided to shoot at 1/60th ISO, etc. So let's fix all that. So we're gonna go, wrong button. Take my shutter speed up now, because I can, because I'm shooting a flash, so might as well reduce all. So the shutter speed helps you with camera shake, even though it's on a tripod. Like when I do it, it's shaking a little bit, especially when I'm zoomed in to him, like he was saying. Like I should be zoomed in pretty close. I'll also skip ahead a slide. There's on the mirrorless camera, I don't know if you guys are knowing, there's a yellow square on there that flashes on and off. That yellow square means it has detected where his eye is and it has automatically eye autofocused. Such a lifesaver. Like I will never do a studio photo shoot of a human being without that feature anymore. Like you used to have to like get it square on their eye and press the button. And yes, I use the back button focus. That's a whole separate conversation too. So in this case, I'm going to get my ISO all the way down to 100 like we talked before. My shutter speed is going to be 1/200, which is the highest sync speed with my strobe. Can't go any faster than that. The aperture in this particular case, I don't really care. I do want to wash out the background. In my studio, I'll probably go f8, and I would have him much closer to me than here. But now if I take that picture, all of a sudden, it's completely different, right? The room light is making no difference. I'm completely overpowering it. So here's a fun fact. If I turn the flash off and I take this picture, this is what we get. So there is a little bit of a cast from the room light on him. It's not 100% gone. I can make it 100% gone if I want to by just getting my aperture just a slightly higher, and that would be completely black picture. But for all intents and purposes, that's black picture, right? In fact, I actually liked some top lighting on him because it's almost like creating that separation. I don't like how close he is to the backdrop. The backdrop was overexposed on him. So if I was redoing this and I could set it up, I would either put a grid on this light, which I do have but not with me, which would not cast any light on the backdrop and would just light him, or I would move him much further away from the backdrop. In fact, if we were to turn this whole thing around and shoot that way, this would be completely black, you guys, right? So in a room where there is no black backdrop, when using a strobe, you can create a black backdrop essentially anywhere, especially indoors. even when the room lights are on. Right, so you can shoot in the room with lights on and make a portrait on a pure black background by just getting your settings in the camera so that the exposure of the room right now would be black, and then adding light. So again, if I just, so now my trigger is off. Take this back on, focus on his eye. Now, if you're actually going to take a portrait, can I have you sit a little bit closer to the edge of your chair? Turn a slightly bit sideways, just a tiny bit. I was going to have you go the other way, but that works too. And give me, think of your wife's best recipe. I should have had it turn the other way. Oops, sorry. So this is a very emotional looking photo. There's an expression in the photo, right? He did think about something that was important to him, or it triggered an emotion. I'm sorry, I should have changed the timer. So it's still a slightly bit overexposed in my opinion. I can fix that. In fact, I should fix that. Just take this down a couple of stops. Okay, now, just for can I have you turn slightly the other way? Yeah, and then look back towards me. Turn your face slightly back towards me. Nice smile. Okay, so the picture is much better than before. Now first of all, if I zoom into his eyes, there's a nice catch light. It's his face is lit from the key light in a good direction. I would probably, to make it even better, I would probably move the light slightly so there's not as much shadow cast on his. Is it blocking some of you know? Okay. Face. So I would probably move the light, get it a little bit more. No, you don't turn. Don't move. All right, one more time. And give me one more motion. And and lean in a little bit. Okay, that might be the photo of the night. Now imagine it being cropped vertically, right? There is a very nice light on his right side. There is shade on his left side. So people ask, can you take a good portrait with the one light? Yes. Is this a pretty good portrait with one light? Yes. I'm sorry, I'm going to move the light because it's in your way. But can we do better? Of course. Right? So when you're working with one light, there's only so many things you can do. Now we can fix the shadow by, anybody know how we can fix the shadow? Or by a reflector. So with a strobe, that little light wouldn't make any difference. But I wish I did not bring a reflector with me. But if I had even a white foam board, anything big and white on the other side of him, in fact, hold on, can we rig it? We can rig it. Do I have anything else with me in all this stuff? I don't think I have it. Well, so sometimes you can cheat. Actually, here. I'm going to have Arthur help me one more time. So remember how I said you use what you have with you and around you to solve problems, right? So I don't have a reflector with me, but I do have another big light. But let's say I don't even have another strobe with me. I just have another big modifier. Now, what do you see on the front of this big light? A big white surface. So even if Arthur was to hold it right about here, and very close to him, I should go back to the live shot. So let's go back to the live shot. Nope, this one. Let's focus. Okay, so you can get even closer. I just want to make sure that you're out of the shot. Get even closer to him and closer to his face. Don't worry about just closer. Good. Okay, now come back out just a little bit. Okay, stop. Stop right there. So, now don't move. Of course, I moved this light out of the way, but now I have to move it back, right? So this light was about here, It might be slightly different. So if we were to compare this photo to the two before it, thank you, Arthur. You're free to go. Yeah, I'll move this out of the way. Now you can sit. You can just set it down. Just set it down. Okay. So this was the 2 pictures ago, and this is after. Can you see how much lighter the shadow on his face is? There's still a shadow. In fact, there should always be a shadow. When you see portraits, some people do headshots with very even lighting on both sides. I completely recommend against it because it's unnatural. As human beings, we're used to there being a light in the sky, a sun. Even when it's cloudy, there's still a sun and there's usually some direction to that light. But especially when there's a sun, we're used to having a direction to a light. So when there is no direction, I'm sorry, I really should have changed the timer to be longer. When there's a direction, you can see where the light's coming from, but there's also a shadow, right? So when you take a good portrait, you want there to be a shadow. But what you don't want is that shadow to be black. So when you fill it in with even a little bit of the reflection of a different white surface, it fills in just enough between this one and this one, where this expression may have been a better moment. So back when we were in the beginning of the lecture saying like, which one is an actual better portrait, I think I caught a better expression here. Like the pose was better. He had emotion. But if we're looking for technical, and some of you guys, when you vote for pictures, you pick technical over creative. So this one is less creative, not as good of a pose, but technically it's a much better picture. And the last thing I'll say about this particular picture is if we were to look at the ISO, it's now at my native on my camera at ISO 100. So this one is as good as my camera can take a picture. So there's the shadow, there's, right? So like, I'm sorry for being that close to you, but it really does get all the details. Like, and there's also no noise, right? So the point of that was also that there is absolutely no noise, or as little as it can be in my camera. To reiterate, strobes, much more powerful. We can overpower the sun. They're less portable, but still portable enough. Or can be. There are some studio strobes. Like at my house, I actually have one that only runs off of electricity. It has a much more powerful modeling lamp, which is handy. Tons of modifier options. I have like 4 in just my bag. TTL, it's not really useful. High-speed sync is useful. So you've seen what one light can do. You've seen what one light and the reflector can do. Can we do better? Of course! I didn't. That was totally from Jim Rohn, by the way. If you guys are familiar with his books, they're phenomenal. It's not about photography. He says, of course, 1,000,000 times. I love a guy. So, leading up to April 20th, where we are right now is where we're going to start. Okay. So we did one basic portrait with a single light at a 45-degree angle. But do you always use one light? No, right? So there are benefits. Well, first of all, when would you want to use one light? Right? So you would want to use one if you want dramatic studio lighting. That first portrait with the harsh shadow, it's not a bad portrait. In fact, I would argue to say that it's more dramatic. It gives him more character. It brings out more of like who he is today. It brought out more of that emotion. Sometimes you want that, but not on your LinkedIn profile, right? So for a dramatic shot, a single light portrait is completely acceptable. Also, if you're working outside, which we will probably cover on April 20th, when there is a natural key light, aka sun, this becomes the fill light. Or this becomes the key light, the sun becomes the fill light. I can choose. Point is, when I'm outside, I at least have 2 light sources. There's always at least 2 light sources when I'm working with a strobe outside. So 1 plus the natural light. Indoors, I can make this room go black. I don't think I can have enough power. Theoretically, you can make outside go black too in bright sunlight. But you'd need a much, much stronger light than that. You can actually combine multiple lights. So in theory, you could actually make outside go nighttime, during the daytime. I don't have that equipment. So what can the second light do, or the reflector? It's a fill light. So it generally is used to fill the harsher shadows. Now there's something I learned this year that I did not know before. If you have two different size modifiers, my intuition was always telling me that I would want to use a bigger light as my key light and a smaller light as my fill light. Because like everybody wants the biggest light you can to have the softest light on the person, right? So that when you get a light closer to somebody and you get it a big light, it looks like there's soft light in him. Generally in portraits you want soft lighting. Unless you want to bring out the character, then you want harsh lighting. So with soft light, I bring the light close and sorry, I lost my train of thought. The size of the light. So the big light is now casting a nice soft light on him. When I have a small fill light, it's casting the light in the other direction. Yes, it's basically filling in the shadows, but it's also creating some cross shadows. So what you'd never want, apparently, according to the best experts in the business, is the cross shadows to be in the reverse direction. So if you have two different size lights with you, you always want to use the smaller one of the two as a key light and the bigger one as a fill light because it creates more natural looking shadows. Honestly, I don't think you'll be able to tell a difference. So if you have two lights, can you take a great portrait? Of course. But can you do better? Yes. So my most recent purchase, which I did not bring with me today, but I will on April 20th, is a strip box. It's fully dressed. It's a very narrow box, soft box. It's not round. And it's designed, well, you can do a lot of cool things with it, actually. There's a lot of things you can do. But primarily, it's meant to go behind your subject. Now, you can do any light behind. Like, I could put this light behind him and create a rim light. Maybe I should show that, but now we're getting close to our time. Does anybody want to see a rim light? Okay. Okay, we'll do a rim light. So if I put this light behind him, now this is not going to be a good picture because I'm only going to use one light. You have to use your imagination that his face would actually be illuminated. But the point is to show what would happen behind him when there is a rim light. So not the prettiest picture. Now theoretically the light should go further behind him. I couldn't quite get it there, but you get the idea. The light would be in the back of him. And this is the time for me to move my picture-in-picture to a different spot. So it's casting a light on his shoulder and down his back. Now this happens to be a pretty big light. Usually when I used to do this in my studio, I would take my small light and I would put it behind as my rim light because it used to be my only extra light. So I'm like, it still created that separation from the background. Sorry, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the slide. So it still created that separation from the background, but it wasn't great. It wasn't great. And I did not have another big light. And I went to a talk where they were doing dog portraits. And they had two strip boxes. And when I saw the result, it blew my mind. Now, I only bought one. But I'm like, there's only so much money I have to spend on this hobby, right? So the idea being is when you have a small light, it's going to have that rim light just on a part of his head, usually the hair. For women, it's most important to light the hair. Without it, you don't get the beauty of the hair. So when you're doing it outside, ideally you want to put the woman in front of the sun and have the sun, especially during golden hour, shine the beautiful light on the hair. And then you do the strobe to fill in the face. So you expose the face yourself, you let the sun do its magic, and those portraits are the best portraits I've ever taken. So natural light hitting the back of the hair, creating that beautiful, beautiful halo looking light, and then you fill in the rest, right? So in the studio you can replicate it by putting a light behind the person. Now, when I have the strip box, it does a few things. Now, that photo that you just saw a minute ago was kind of spilling in the places where I didn't really want the light. By having a much more narrow box, especially with a grid, such as this one, which would direct the light only where I want it to, so on his shoulder, it would literally create a rim, a strip of light just around his body, and because it's a fairly tall strip box, it would cover even if he was standing like from most of his leg all the way through his head. right? So all of it, and it would separate him from the background. And on the paper, it sounds such a negligible thing, like who cares, right? You're not talking about main light, you're not talking about shadows, but when you see the difference, it is night and day. Like, so when you really try to advance your photography to the next level, you're like, well, where are all these people winning awards? Like, oh, start paying, they have rim lights. Like, it really does make a difference. It's a subtle difference. Whoops, messed that up. Nope, that's what I was trying to do. So, primarily it's for backgrounds, but you can do other things with a strip box. You can also do other things with a third light. Can you have more lights than 3? Of course! Now, my expertise to date is with up to 3. The only time I use a 4th light, Arthur, you want to guess? I keep going to like...
You're in an auditorium or something.
Very good guess.
You want to get as much as you can.
Very good guess, but I'm still talking in a studio. So, but just like an auditorium, what would be behind my subject in a studio? A backdrop. And sometimes those realtors and bankers and whatnot, they want a pure white backdrop. Now here's a fun fact. If I put a pure white backdrop behind him and take the picture when the light was already, is it going to be pure white? No. Why? We covered this. Anybody remember why? Did he leave? No. Oh, I think he left. The person who remembered the light ratio, because the subject is closer to my light than my background is getting probably half, maybe a quarter of the light that is hitting him. So if my subject is properly exposed, my background is getting a quarter of the light. Now, sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes it's too much, and you have to put a grid on your light so you hit it less. But sometimes you want a pure white background. And that's the only time I'll bring out a 4th light and hit it on the background to make it pure white. And that you must use a light meter. Because another fun fact, if you overexpose the light that's hitting your backdrop on pure white, anybody want to guess what happens to your subject? No, good guess, because he's still lit with my other, so he's still going to be properly exposed from the front. But now, he's going to have this like glare on him from the back because that white background is not only white, it is so bright, it's actually lighting him from the rear. So you never want to overexpose your pure white backdrop. So you have to measure it to get it just right. If it goes up too high, it casts too much light on your subject. And if it goes too low, then it's not pure white. And they can't cut them out in like one click in Photoshop to put in their business cards and whatnot. Questions? I know that was a lot. So the last 2 slides are really fun. They're my favorite 2 slides. So we briefly touched on this. So why use constant lights? The constant lights will help you learn. They require higher ISO, so I would not use them for portraits, but you can use them for a whole lot of stuff, especially when we have those, what are they called? When you take pictures of stuff. Still life, thank you. My God, flew out of my head. So when you do still life photos, I'm like, we just did it. When you do still life, absolutely much better to work with a constant light because you can get your shadows and your light reflections and everything perfectly. And you're not limited by your shutter speed. Because if your camera's on a tripod, the thing isn't moving, well, you might as well take a long exposure. So you can still get your ISO 100. It's just going to take you a little bit more than 200ths of a second. It might be 1/50th of a second. On a tripod, ideally with a remote trigger, not going to make any difference. As Arthur mentioned, the problem is powering those lights when you don't have electrical outlets. There are batteries that can do it. They can do it for a while. Eventually they'll die. The brighter the light, the faster the battery will die. It's possible but complicated. And in between, as you've noticed, we have a strobe with a modeling light. The modeling light is essentially a constant light, but it's much weaker than a dedicated constant light. So the bulb in that modeling light, I think, was only 10 watts, where that one is 200 watts running at 15%. No, 300? 300 watts running at 15%. Not every strobe has a modeling light. So if you want to make, first of all, if you want to venture into strobe photography, like maybe not everybody should, but if you do want to do it, there's a lot of benefits. And you get there by learning with the constant light, seeing what they do, and then playing around. The investment is small. Even, those strobes are, you know, a couple of $100 here and there, maybe less. But not all of them have modeling lights. Now, so what do you do if you want to learn how to do strobes and you don't have a constant light and you don't have a modeling light? You put some bulbs in the light. Literally. Do you guys see this extension cord? I don't really want to unglue everything in the front, but there's a 3-pronged outlet in there. It's a go straight up and with, maybe I should do it. I should explain this. I'll do it. We're still not over our time. So that's the grid, if I wasn't very clear before. This is just a diffusion box. And inside of there, I have 3 LED bulbs. These can be used as a modeling light. This can be used as any light. I actually use this as my office light for my Zoom calls, literally. Like this sits in front of me at home as my light because I'm too cheap to invest in anything else, and this works just fine. And I already have the modifier. So I was like, how the hell can I get away without buying a professional video light? Well, that's how. Good enough, right? You can do that with almost any modifier. Not all of them, but many of them, including that one, has a zipper somewhere on the side. One of these sides has a zipper. Right here. Like, I have a zipper. So I can literally just put a extension cord in there and shove some LED lights in there. It helps you learn, or it literally can work as a light source. Like that, it can do the job as a video light, or you can learn by, that one does not have a zipper. they don't all have it. So if you're buying a modifier and you want to use this method, you would be much better off getting a modifier that has a zipper on the side. Just saying. Unless you already have one. Only use LED bulbs. You put tungsten in there, you're going to set your house on fire. So just LED only. Safety. But you can literally, like, extension cord, put it inside, poof. I also wouldn't leave it on indefinitely. Like, even LED ones get some heat, but it's not really crazy. I don't think that's risky. And that's kind of how I learned. And the light meter I already mentioned can be a very, very useful tool. Okay. Bonus tip. We've alluded to this a little bit before. Why did I switch to mirrorless? Do I recommend mirrorless? So the biggest reason, and if I would have remembered to change the timer from like a 5-second timeout, is live preview. Once I turn it on, what you see is what you get. So as I change the settings in my camera, what I see on my screen is what the picture is going to be before I take the picture. Now, it's not going to be as good of a quality, but exposure-wise, it's going to give you a very good idea if you're overexposed, underexposed, or how it's going to go. When you work with a flash, it's almost opposite. As soon as I turn my trigger on, that mode, it actually goes off. So the live preview goes off. It gives me enough exposure to see him, not what he's going to be exposed, because it doesn't know how much power is going to come from the flash. But it works great with modeling lights too. So let me work with the modeling light, and then the flash just adds more power. Huge time saver, and makes my life much better. Eye autofocus. The animal autofocus. Many of them have dogs, pets, birds. If you've ever struggled to take a picture of the bird, just go mirrorless. And make sure the mirrorless camera that you buy has bird, eye, autofocus. You will never miss focus on the eye again. The camera will just do it for you. Just spend some money. It's magic most of the time. It will miss. So just because you think you have eye autofocus, there are other settings in the camera that will affect focus. You can still miss. And it is still a computer. It might focus on other things, so it's not perfect. It's much better for video. If you do anything with video, like my friend in the back is doing, she's using a phenomenal photo camera as a video camera that is also a phenomenal video camera. Thank you, Simone. And generally speaking, they're much worse at focusing in low light. So my 10-year-old Nikon DSLR will still outperform this 2-year-old Nikon mirrorless if I turn that light off, even to focus on his eye. It will struggle. Or this one will struggle, the other one will not. It will be like, boom, sharp eye focus, right? The newest, most expensive ones have gotten much better. So the camera of the year from Nikon Z8, Z9, they have significantly better than my Z6II. They're improving constantly. So I think most professional photographers are now saying the top models are at least as good as the DSLRs were. I don't know if I believe them. I don't have one. I can't test it. But I did try, so every year, almost every year, I go to the Renaissance Festival, which is happening now. Great photo opportunity, highly recommend it to you guys. But the hardest thing, in my opinion, to photograph there is when they do the jousting. Those horses run fast, and they do that stuff pretty quick. When I did my DSLR in continuous autofocus and all that, it missed a ton. When I did this one, it missed a ton. Which one missed more? I want to say that one because the lighting was good. So with good light, this one actually got more in focus, but it missed a ton. So I'm hoping when the next model comes along, or when I can afford a higher end model, they say you get much more in focus. So just having a more expensive camera is not really going to do it for you. You still have to know all the settings. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but equipment does help. So I've only upgraded my equipment either when it failed or when I've literally reached the maximum it could do for me. Whether it was focusing speed, low light performance, all of these things are factors, auto eye focus. So I would not necessarily recommend, like I would recommend that camera, the $300 camera to more people than I would recommend this camera. Is this a better camera? Well, yes, by a lot. But it's heavier. You don't want to always carry it around with you, and it's still not perfect. And even the best cameras out today, they're not perfect. So you have to know your gear. Going back to the very beginning with the phone, you have to know how to use the cameras on your phone. Know the settings, know the modes, know what they do in different conditions, know how to take the best advantage of it, when to use a pro mode and when to not, when to turn this thing on full auto or when to turn this thing on full manual. I'll give you one trick. I almost never take it off of auto ISO. I think that's the safest setting to keep an auto on the camera. So mine is 95% of the time it's on auto ISO unless I'm using flash. When I'm using flash, I want to know what my ISO is. Other than that, it's kind of all up to you guys. Any questions?
What's your opinion about, nowadays, like AI applications that you can do most of the lighting post shooting?
You can do some lighting post. If you take if I take any of those really poorly exposed photos, there's nothing AI can do. It will struggle. If you give AI good starting points, then yes, it can tweak it a little bit, absolutely. Speaking of AI, if you guys, who is it? Was it you I was talking to about Olympus or OM system? I think it may have been you. I was talking to one of our club members about a different camera brand that I would love to buy, but not because it's better than Nikon. It's not. It's more compact, so it's better for travel. It's a Micro Four Thirds, the Olympus one. But most importantly, the latest models, they have so much software built into them that they do a ton of stuff for you. And they do a ton of stuff that you would later do on a computer or you would do with hardware. For example, they have natural density filters built into the camera through software. It's magical. There's just so many features. It can do half graduated, so you can do like darker sky and perfectly exposed portrait. Magical. I would have to get like expensive filters and screw them on and screw them off. And it's like this whole nightmare thing. And yes, I own one, but like I almost never use it. But if I had it in the camera, one by the way, click, done. So I think my next camera, as much as I want another fancier Nikon, is going to be an Olympus with like maybe 2 lenses just for travel because it's more compact. It's better for birding because I can have a lens half this size, goes like 400 mil on me. And the autofocus is good. There's like really nothing, no downsides except low light performance. So if you guys know me, you know my favorite thing to photograph. Anybody? Fireworks. If you're photographing fireworks, you're working with low light or any kind of low, I think there's a contest coming up with low light photography this year. You will struggle with low light photography unless you have a large sensor in your camera. It can be overcome, and that will be a whole separate lecture, and I'm happy to do that one too. But it helps. Any other questions?
Oh, Roman, thank you. Wow, that's great.
Yeah.